Ancient Sumerians were more than familiar with handbags, or perhaps objects that modern people perceive as such.
Across Mesopotamian temples, Olmec sites in Mesoamerica, and even the monumental stones of Göbekli Tepe, carvings of winged figures clutching small, handbag-like containers recur in contexts separated by millennia and thousands of kilometers. Scholars and enthusiasts alike are compelled by a simple yet perplexing question. What do these mysterious handbags of the gods really represent? Are they mere artistic symbols of ritual and divine favor, or could they hint at deeper, universal ideas about sacred knowledge, containment, and power? Well, let's start digging. Historical origins and geographic spread. The motif of figures, often winged, semi-divine, or otherwise exalted, holding small, handbag-like containers, is among the most peculiar and enduring images to emerge from ancient art. These objects appear in stone reliefs, temple carvings, and monumental sculpture across several of the world's earliest civilizations, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, and even at the prehistoric sanctuary of Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. The recurring form, a rounded or rectangular pouch with a curved handle, has intrigued archaeologists, historians, and the public because it seems to represent something practical yet deeply symbolic. In Mesopotamia, the earliest known examples appear in the art of the Sumerians and later the Assyrians and Babylonians, roughly spanning from 2500 to 700 BCE. These civilizations, clustered around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, produced some of the most intricate relief carvings of the ancient Near East. These works adorned palace walls, temple facades, and ceremonial gateways. Among the most notable depictions are those of the Apkallu, or sage figures, semi-divine beings described in Akkadian texts as guardians of wisdom and intermediaries between gods and men. The Apkallu were often shown as human figures with wings or the heads of eagles, holding in one hand a pine cone-shaped object, or the mululu, and in the other a small bucket or bag, or the banduddu. So, what are these handbags? We'll answer that shortly. For now, let's take a walk through history. Archaeologists first uncovered these images in the mid-19th century during large-scale excavations in what was then the Ottoman Empire. The British archaeologist Austin Henry Layard, who led digs at the site of Nimrud, or ancient Kalhu, between 1845 and 1851, discovered the vast northwest palace of King Ashurnasirpal II. Among its many sculpted panels were dozens of Apkallu figures performing what appeared to be a sacred rite of purification. Each figure carried the characteristic bag, rendered in stone with a distinctive semicircular handle and textured surface. Layard's published engravings of these reliefs in his 1853 book, Monuments of Nineveh, helped introduce this enigmatic image to the world. Later discoveries at the Assyrian capitals of Nineveh and Khorsabad in the late 19th century by Paul Emil Botta and Hormuzd Rassam revealed similar motifs. The consistent appearance of these objects across Assyrian art indicates that they served a standardized ritual or symbolic purpose. The accompanying inscriptions and placement within royal architecture reinforce their ceremonial function. For instance, reliefs from Sargon II's palace at Khorsabad, dating back to almost 710 BCE, show the Apkallu flanking the king or divine tree, sprinkling water from the cone into the tree's branches while holding the bucket below. This possibly symbolizes fertility, purification, or the transmission of divine life force. Yet, despite these detailed depictions, archaeologists have never uncovered an actual physical object corresponding to the bag or bucket. No remnants in metal, stone, or clay match the form shown in the carvings. This absence deepens the mystery. If such containers existed in ritual practice, what were they made of, and why have none survived? If not, were they purely symbolic inventions meant to visualize unseen spiritual concepts? The motif's intrigue extends far beyond Mesopotamia. In Mesoamerica, thousands of miles and millennia apart, a remarkably similar form appears in Olmec art. particularly at the site of La Venta in Tabasco, Mexico. Monument 19, carved around 900 to 400 BCE, shows a figure emerging from the coils of a serpent clutching a small rectangular object with a curved handle. Nearly identical in outline to the Mesopotamian handbag discovered in the 1940s by Mexican archaeologist Matthew Sterling. This monument became central to discussions about cross-cultural parallels in ancient iconography. The figure is thought to represent a ruler or priest associated with the feathered serpent, an early form of the deity later known as Quetzalcoatl. Another site that has contributed to this global puzzle is Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, dated to roughly 9,600 to 9,500 BCE, long before the rise of Mesopotamian cities. Excavations led by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt from 1995 until his death in 2014 revealed a complex of massive T-shaped limestone pillars arranged in circular enclosures. Many of these pillars bear low-relief carvings of animals and abstract symbols, including several instances of objects that look like stylized handbags. These bags appear above the heads of animals, such as foxes and birds, suggesting a symbolic or cosmological role. But wait, the strange part does not end here. There is no evidence that people in these early civilizations carried or used handbags in the modern sense. Practical containers certainly existed, such as woven baskets, leather pouches, or small vessels for liquids and powders, but none resembled the stylized rectangular form so meticulously carved in stone. This contrast adds to the fascination. The image clearly mattered enough to be repeated for centuries, yet it does not correspond to any known utilitarian object. In Mesopotamian art, it was always held in a ritual context. In Mesoamerica, it appeared in association with deities or rulers. In Göbekli Tepe, it was seen among symbols that may represent celestial or spiritual concepts. Today, the handbags of the gods endure as both an archaeological enigma and a cultural phenomenon. So, what do these handbags of the gods actually mean? What does the mainstream scholarship say? The earliest discoveries of these enigmatic handbags of gods motifs came during the golden age of Mesopotamian archaeology in the mid-19th century, when British and French expeditions unearthed the palaces of ancient Assyria and Babylon. Figures such as Austin Henry Layard, who excavated the Northwest Palace at Nimrud between 1845 and 1851, and Paul-Émile Botta, who uncovered the royal complex of Khorsabad, were the first to encounter the now famous winged beings, later identified as Apkallu, each holding a cone and a small bucket-like object. At the time, the meaning of these items was unknown. Layard described them in his 1853 publication Monuments of Nineveh simply as mystic emblems and curious accessories. By the late 19th century, the decipherment of cuneiform and the publication of Assyrian religious texts began to illuminate the figure's identity. Scholars such as Henry Rawlinson and George Smith linked the winged beings to the Apkallu mentioned in Akkadian and Sumerian myths, semi-divine sages created by the god Ea or Enki to impart wisdom to humanity. The identification of the cone as a mulilu or purifier and the bucket as a bandudu or container came through philological studies of ritual texts found in Nineveh's royal library. These texts described purification ceremonies in which priests used cones or branches to sprinkle consecrated water, a practice known as niskutu. Thus, the images on palace walls were not depictions of mysterious tools, but visual representations of a known Mesopotamian purification ritual. By the early 20th century, archaeologists such as Leonard William King and Reginald Campbell Thompson built on this linguistic evidence to produce detailed analyses of Assyrian iconography. Thompson's 1904 study The Devils and Evil Spirits of Babylonia compared the Apkallu reliefs to incantation texts, suggesting that the figures served a protective, apotropaic function. He argued that the reliefs were designed to shield palaces and temples from malevolent forces, much as clay foundation deposits or guardian statues protected sacred spaces. The bucket, he wrote, likely contained lustration water, used to purify both the king and the royal environment. King's Catalogue of Artifacts from Nineveh similarly identified the bandudu as a sacred vessel, emphasizing that its placement in scenes of ritual purification aligned with the broader Mesopotamian belief in cosmic maintenance, the perpetual cleansing and renewal of the world through divine action. Throughout the 20th century, Assyriologists refined this interpretation by situating the imagery within a broader ritual and mythological framework. Thorkild Jacobsen, one of the leading Mesopotamian scholars of the mid-century, emphasized the deeply symbolic nature of Mesopotamian art. In his 1976 work, The Treasures of Darkness, Jacobsen described how every element of Assyrian palace reliefs functioned as part of a ritualized worldview, one in which the king stood as a mediator between divine order and human society. The Apkallu, therefore, were not decorative spirits, but manifestations of divine wisdom and ritual power, visualizing the constant purification necessary to sustain life and order. The imagery's repetition across multiple reigns further reinforced the view that these were not isolated symbols, but components of an enduring state religion. Reliefs from Sennacherib's palace at Nineveh depict similar scenes, suggesting a continuity of iconographic tradition that spanned nearly 2 centuries. The repetition of the same visual formula, the cone raised toward the sacred tree and the bucket held below, implies an established canonical meaning understood by both priests and artists. From the mid-20th century onward, scholars began to explore how these motifs related to the broader visual language of Mesopotamian sacred architecture. Irene Winter, an influential art historian, argued in several essays during the 1980s and 1990s that Assyrian palace reliefs were performative in nature. They did not merely depict rituals, but enacted them visually. According to Winter, the palace itself was a sacred space, and the carved reliefs functioned as perpetual invocations of the purification ceremony. In this sense, the bandudu and mululu were not literal containers, but enduring symbols, sculpted prayers, one might say, meant to ensure divine favor for the king and protection for his realm. Meanwhile, studies by scholars such as Jeremy Black and Anthony Green synthesized decades of philological and iconographic research, confirming the consensus interpretation. Black and Green described the bandudu as a ritual bucket containing sacred water used by protective genies. They noted that its consistent pairing with the pine cone, a gesture of sprinkling, mirrored the physical act of purification in Babylonian temple rites. At the same time, the lack of any archaeological artifact resembling the depicted handbag has been an enduring point of curiosity. Excavations across major Assyrian and Babylonian sites, from Nimrud and Nineveh in northern Iraq to Ur and Babylon in the south, have yielded thousands of ritual items, bowls, libation vessels, censers, and amulets. Yet none correspond to the compact, curved-handled container shown in the reliefs. Most scholars attribute this absence to artistic stylization. The handbag is a visual shorthand for a ritual vessel, not a representation of an object intended for practical use. This interpretation aligns with the broader Mesopotamian artistic tradition, which often depicted abstracted symbols rather than literal objects, such as the stylized Tree of Life or the composite creatures that guarded palace entrances. Modern technological studies have further clarified our understanding. High-resolution imaging and 3D modeling of the Nimrud reliefs by the British Museum's Iraq Heritage Project have revealed fine incised details on the bags, including cross-hatched textures that likely represent woven or metal surfaces. Such details indicate that the artists aimed to show richness and sanctity, not utility. Similarly, residue analyses from temple sites have confirmed the widespread use of water and aromatic oils in ritual purification, consistent with the presumed contents of the bandudu. By the early 21st century, scholars such as Zainab Bahrani and Paul Collins began reassessing the visual and political context of these motifs. Bahrani, in her 2004 book The Graven Image, Representation in Babylonia and Assyria, argued that Assyrian art was not merely illustrative, but ideological. The reliefs were statements of cosmic kingship, projecting an image of the ruler as a divine mediator, maintaining universal order. Within this schema, the Apkallu figures and their ritual implements embodied the moral and cosmic purity that legitimized royal authority. Today, the scholarly consensus remains remarkably consistent. The objects depicted in the hands of the Apkallu, the so-called handbags of the gods, are ritual buckets used for purification. Yet, researchers emphasize that their significance lies less in the literal object than in the act it represents. But wait, the story doesn't end here. Some believe that the handbags represent much more than this. Speculative theories and alternative perspectives. While archaeologists generally interpret these images as symbolic representations of ritual implements, the unusual recurrence of this shape across continents and millennia has given rise to a spectrum of alternative interpretations. One of the most discussed interpretations is the ancient astronaut hypothesis, first popularized in the 1960s and 1970s by authors such as Erich von Däniken, whose book Chariots of the Gods argued that ancient deities were actually extraterrestrial visitors. Within this framework, the handbags seen in Assyrian, Sumerian, and Olmec art are reimagined not as ritual buckets, but as advanced technological devices. Proponents point to the bag's standardized geometric shape, rectangular with a curved handle, as evidence that they might depict portable equipment carried by these visitors, perhaps devices for communication, power, or atmospheric control. Supporters cite the uniformity of these motifs across distinct cultures as a clue that they might record actual encounters with beings whose tools were beyond ancient comprehension. A second line of interpretation approaches the motif from a psychological and symbolic perspective, drawing on the theories of Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung. Jung's notion of universal archetypes posits that certain symbols recur independently across cultures because they emerge from the collective, unconscious, deep-seated patterns that structure human imagination. From this view, the handbag could represent an archetype of containment, the womb, the vessel, or the sacred space in which something precious is held. Such imagery might symbolize the containment of divine essence, the safeguarding of wisdom, or the preservation of life's creative potential. Supporters of this theory note that the handbag form, a container that both conceals and protects, recurs in myths from Pandora's jar in Greece to the sacred satchels of shamans in Central Asia and North America. The plausibility of this interpretation lies in its psychological reach. Even without historical contact, cultures might independently develop similar symbols to express shared existential concerns about creation, fertility, and the transmission of sacred knowledge. In contrast, New Age and metaphysical interpretations give the motif a more spiritual, energy-based dimension. Within these frameworks, the handbags are understood as vessels of divine energy or consciousness, instruments used by priests or celestial beings to manipulate unseen forces. Writers within the New Age community often link the images to concepts such as chi, prana, or universal energy fields, suggesting that the containers held or channeled subtle energies essential to life and cosmic harmony. Some claim parallels with the Ankh of ancient Egypt, a symbol of life energy, or with the Linga Yoni structures of India, both representing the union of material and spiritual principles. Authors such as Graham Hancock and Andrew Collins have gone as far as to suggest that the recurring handbag motif may record the memory of an advanced prehistoric culture that existed before the end of the last ice age, possibly around 12,000 years ago. In Hancock's 2015 book Magicians of the Gods, he proposed that Göbekli Tepe, where the oldest handbag carvings appear, might have been constructed under the guidance of survivors from such a lost civilization, custodians of sophisticated astronomical and architectural knowledge. In this scenario, the handbags symbolize tools or knowledge passed down from these civilization bearers, who later influenced cultures in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Americas. Advocates point to the timing of Göbekli Tepe's construction, coinciding with the end of the Younger Dryas climatic event, as potential evidence of a global disruption that could have erased an earlier culture. Despite friction from mainstream scholarship, the idea of a forgotten chapter in human history remains compelling to many. These speculative frameworks, though unverified, reveal much about the enduring psychological power of ancient symbols. Each theory reflects the modern desire to find continuity between past and present, to interpret ancient art as evidence of a hidden order linking humanity to something greater. Their modern resurgence owes much to digital media. In the 21st century, the motif has gained viral visibility through online platforms, where users circulate images of the Assyrian Apkallu alongside Olmec and Göbekli Tepe carvings, often accompanied by captions about ancient technology or lost knowledge. In popular culture, the motif appears in television series, documentaries, and even digital art. Episodes of Ancient Aliens have used the handbag image to illustrate arguments about extraterrestrial influence, while art exhibitions and graphic novels reinterpret it as a metaphor for the containment of divine knowledge. This continued reappearance demonstrates how ancient symbols can migrate across media and genres, sustaining relevance in new cultural contexts. Psychologically, the appeal lies in the tension between the known and the unknown. Objects that suggest hidden contents, especially when held by gods or supernatural beings, provoke curiosity and speculation. The handbag form, with its suggestion of concealment and portability, invites the imagination to ask what divine secrets might lie within. Mythologically, the motif aligns with long-standing traditions in which gods wield or guard sacred objects that confer power or wisdom. Hermes' pouch, the Hindu kamandalu, or the Mesoamerican copal bag used in incense offerings. In each case, containment becomes a metaphor for possession, of knowledge, fertility, or authority. Whether these carved objects represent ritual buckets, archetypal vessels, metaphysical tools, or echoes of a forgotten age, they testify to the universal human drive to link the earthly with the transcendent. Their presence in sacred art across multiple civilizations underscores how symbols can outlast the languages and religions that created them. Even now, thousands of years after the stone carvers of Nimrud, Laventa, and Göbekli Tepe laid down their tools, these enigmatic images continue to inspire questions about our origins, our imagination, and our place in the universe. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.